Well, good evening, everyone. We want to welcome you as you're logging in. We know there's going to be a bunch of you tonight. We are delighted to have you with us. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture that has brought you this program, the Parent Education Series, and tonight's program, the Neurodiversity Education Series. We are here to talk about why neurodivergent kids need autonomy to navigate a neurotypical world. And with us, we have Dr. Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson, co-authors of The Self-Driven Child, one of Bev's and my very favorite parenting books in the last, I don't know, 30 years. So again, special treat for us. Please take it away, Bill and Ned.
Thank you so much, Charlene. We love you. We love you folks at Parent Venture. Um, I'm a neuropsychologist, and for the last 41 years, I've done testing of neurodivergent kids. And in the 1980s and 90s, it was primarily kids with learning disabilities and ADHD. And after about 2010, with this dramatic increase in the incidence of autism, that a lot more autistic kids now are a question about could my child be autistic? And in the early days, I have kids, LD kids, asking, doing things like this. I asked a 5-year-old in 1987, the first question on a vocabulary test, which is, "What's a cow?" He looked at me and said, "I can't believe you don't know that." And then more recently, one of the autistic kids, I saw this autistic kid who's really smart, really sweet, and speaks very formally. And it was hot in my office, so I turned on a fan. And when he felt the cool breeze, he said, "I thank you, William Stixrud, for keeping people so cool." So it's been a cool way to make a living. And Ned, do you want to show the next slide?
Yes, I
Um,
can.
as Charlene mentioned, Ned and I have written, go back one. Go back one slide.
Working on it.
Yeah. We've written these 3 books. And the first one, The Self-Driven Child, has sold over 1 million copies worldwide. Yeah, it's a good book. But we think that the appeal of it is that this is the subtitle, the science and the sense of giving kids more control of their own lives. And our major thesis, the thing that we talk about the most, is giving kids a sense of control or a sense of autonomy, because it's so important. And I'll just mention here, the other thing that's really important is neurodiversity, in the sense that biological systems, they just work best with a high level of diversity. And I know of at least 5 areas in which dyslexic adults on average, outperform adults who learn to read easily. I also know that some of the most successful people in this world now are autistic, people with really great technical skills. The Israeli army actually has a whole unit where they recruit autistic people because they're so good at certain things. And a lot of the kids I test to have very successful parents have ADHD. That they're courtroom lawyers. That they're surgeons. They're people who have to manage a lot of balls in the air at the same time. People have to do really focused work because there's time pressure. A lot of the successful developers I see, almost all of them have ADHD. So it's important. And the sense of control is really important. Next slide, now. So let me tell you what it is, what a sense of control is. It's the subjective experience of autonomy or agency, so that you don't feel helpless or passive or resigned or impotent like that. And also, you have that confidence. You can handle stressful stuff so you aren't chronically worried or fearful that the other shoe's going to drop, and you don't feel chronically anxious or pressured or driven or overwhelmed. And it turns out that it's a basic biological and psychological need. It's crucial for mental health and for self-motivation. And if a kid is ever going to become fully independent, he has to have a sense that this is my life. He has to have a healthy sense of control over his own life. Next slide, please. And I'll just mention before I explain this slide that the more Ned and I have been talking about this stuff for 15 years at least now, and intensively since our first book came out. And the more we read about it, the more we talk about it, the more we talk to people about it, the more we see what a powerful idea this is. But we come to the conclusion that the 2 most important things as parents that we can give our kids are, number 1, is a sense that they're deeply and unconditionally loved, and number 2, a healthy sense of control of their own lives. And What I'm showing you here on this slide is the neurological signature of a sense of control, where the prefrontal cortex, the frontal amygdala, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, where the prefrontal cortex regulates the amygdala, the very primitive part of the brain that just senses and reacts to threat, and the rest of the brain's stress response circuits. So that when you're in your right mind, you have a sense of control, you're purposeful, you're in the moment, you're engaged, you aren't heightened, you aren't extremely anxious, or you aren't feeling overwhelmed, or I have no idea what to do. You're feeling competent. Your prefrontal cortex is regulating the amygdala and the rest of the stress system, keeping things keeping you calm. And this gives us two ways of nurturing a sense of control. One is developing that sense of autonomy or agency and helping kids gain confidence in their ability to solve their own problems. And secondly, is helping kids maintain a brain state that supports a sense of control through things like exercise, sleep, meditation, that kind of stuff. Next slide, please. And I mentioned that it's a basic biological and psychological need. It turns out that just having choice is extremely important for humans and animals. And we exert control over our environment by making choices. And it turns out with animals and with humans, even if what you choose, even if the choice you make doesn't really make much difference, you just prefer making a choice. And you're in situations where choice is limited. It's aversive, it's stressful, and it's aversive to humans and animals. And you think about it, you can see this in infants. I mean, I've tested at least 2 or 3 kids in the last 41 years whose first words were "no way." And you see kids who say, "You aren't the boss of me, do it myself." You see it in kids certainly before they're 2. And in adolescence, that desire for control and autonomy, it's the driver to independence. And even with elderly people, you got elderly parents or grandparents in a nursing home, they live longer if they're given choice about one thing. So if you say, "Do you want to have dinner at 4 or 4:30?" They live longer. So our feeling is that given what I'm saying right now, if we thwart the development of that sense of control, we do it at our own peril. And the challenge is, from my point of view, that with neurodivergent kids, we focus largely on trying to get them to do stuff, trying to get them to make progress, and paid very little attention to autonomy. And I think we want to change this because, again, to become independent, you have to have a sense that this is my life and I'm going to get out of it what I put into it. Ned, do you want to take over for a while?
Yeah, and I would really love to emphasize that point that these are basic biological needs for humans, not for neurotypical humans, not for kids who are getting A's, not for kids whose rooms are straight and clear and they've somehow earned autonomy. Kids don't deserve this autonomy so much as they need this autonomy if we ever want them to develop in all the ways that we want them to develop. And part of what we'll talk about, some of the reason that raising children who are neurodivergent is so difficult is because oftentimes those executive functions of the prefrontal cortex can be either that is a little wobbly, particularly with kids who are ADHD, so that self-control is not quite yet where we want it to be. Or if you've got a kid who's really sensitive, particularly, folks who are autistic, then we have almost by definition a more overreactive amygdala. So if you either have an underpowered prefrontal cortex or an overpowered amygdala, things are going to be a little bit challenging there. And we as parents tend to want to come and control things. But again, these are not neurotypical needs. These in some ways are even more powerful. The need for autonomy is even more important for kids who are neurodivergent. Some of the research that we lean into is a woman named Sonia Lupien, who heads the Center for Study of Stress up in Montreal, Canada. And she says, I defy you to think of something that stresses you out, that freaks you out, that doesn't fall under one of these 4 things, that doesn't make you nuts. And so you can read these as well as I can. Novelty, unpredictability, threat, for kids in school. Am I cool enough, smart enough, pretty enough, hot enough, whatever enough? And particularly for middle school and for kids for whom school is not going well, it's threatening all the time because they're comparing themselves to their peers and they feel judged by their teachers and their parents are worried about them. And it sure doesn't make them feel like they're really killing it. And again, then when they get stressed, those executive functions go sideways. For parents of kids for whom school is not easy, it's doubly difficult, largely because You can't make your kids do things. I mean, you can make it so unpleasant that they go along with you, but if your kid refused to do homework, you're going to duct tape them to a chair. What are you going to do? And well-intended educators will tell well-intended parents, well, Ned, you got to make sure she does her homework. Respectfully, I think it's grossly unfair to task another human being with a task that is by definition impossible to do. I can support my kids in doing the homework, but I can't make them do their homework. And so this is where parents can feel what Sapolsky calls as the killer combination. You feel responsible, but you can't actually control it. Again, this is true for all parents, right? If we could all, we were joking with Charlene and Bev earlier, if we could make our kids go to sleep, most of us would have 3 or 4 or 5, not 2, because um, having children who won't go to sleep is not easy on any of us. We just want to take this nuts lens and put it through what it feels like for a child who has ADHD or a parent of an ADHD child. And we'll talk about this for autism as well. And, again, you can read through all this. But simply put, if we remind ourselves that kids with ADHD, they have lower baseline levels of dopamine, so it's harder for them to activate. They may know that this thing is important, but they can't get themselves to do it until the last possible moment, well past the point where the parents have lost their minds and they start screaming about trying to get kids to move along. They're going to be impulsive, doing things they know they shouldn't, but they just feel like doing, and then they get in trouble, and then they feel bad about it, and shame doesn't do anything particularly good for executive functions. And it's hard. And then, of course, when kids aren't doing well, the concerned, loving adults jump in and try to fix things for them. And that can be teachers who are trying to give all the support, but maybe in ways that might be a little bit too much, parents doing the exact same thing. One of the things that we often ask ourselves is, we ask of kids, particularly ones who are underperforming, is who's most upset? And I love this kind of line of thinking. I had a girl I was working with who was quite bright, but she was ADHD and she was anxious and she was depressed and just things were frankly kind of a hot mess. And I was the, I don't know, umpteenth tutor who was hired as an executive function coach. And most of which meant her parents had outsourced the nagging because the kid stopped listening to them. So they're trying to get the tutor to nag the kid. And I take a slightly different bent and say, well, my friend Bill says. And so I asked her, I said, if something hasn't gone well, or you don't hit it in, or you botch this or bomb that, who's most upset? And actually, can we put this in the chat or the Q&A? Anyone got an answer? Who's most upset? I'll wait for this, but I'll keep rolling. As you can imagine, well, my mom. So here's the technique that we then employ. Okay, after your mom, if something doesn't go well, then who's most upset? My dad. Okay, great. After mom and after dad, who's most upset? I think my teacher. After mom, after dad, after teacher, my tutor, then my therapist, then my little brother because he can't stand the fighting, the dog who just on and on it goes. And I ask her, of course, so where are you on that list? Oh, I'm not on that list. That's not my list. And the challenge is kids who are ADHD, troubles with executive functions, they need more support. It's harder for them. Everything, organizations, getting things done, problems, all of it. It's all harder. And they need more support. But fundamentally, they still have the same need for a sense of control. So we need to make sure that we are approaching this in ways that we offer support, but we're not undermining the sense of control that they need. For autistic kids, possibly even more complicated. Think about think about middle school for any of us, and then put it through the eyes of a kid who's autistic for whom understanding social dynamics is challenging. This is my daughter. By definition, they're going to be less flexible. My daughter, who's 21 and autistic, she drives it crazy when my wife and I kind of do things on the fly, and I'm very much an on the fly person. There's a wonderful book, by the way, called Is That Clear? And it's about communication between autistic and allistic people, non-autistic people. Quite good. I have to shape my thinking and my words and put my head in her space, lest I unintentionally, by trying to be, spontaneous, inject a whole bunch of unpredictability into the situation in ways that make her super upset. Perceived threat. We wrote in The Self-Driven Child. We didn't know my daughter was autistic when we were writing that book. And we described in that book how she was sensitive to what I think of as second-hand stress. So if Bill is frustrated near her and Ned is angry near her and someone else is upset, she would think that those people are angry, upset, and frustrated with her. sorry, or at her rather than just nearby her. And if you've got an autistic kid, you may be experiencing that as well and wondering why they're so upset because this noise isn't about them, but because they kind of overinterpret things or miss it a little bit, they do think it's about them. And that's it's kind of stressful to think that everyone who's upset is somehow that's your fault. Oh, I'm trying to do this again with the buttons. So here's going back to the concern that we as loving parents can overprotect kids, over support kids in ways that are well intended but may backfire a little bit. Steve Mayer does this beautiful research on what's called learned helplessness. And he had a paradigm study that's worth reading called Learned Helplessness at 50, kind of what we got right and what we got wrong. And he said, what we got wrong was this. These rodents that they conditioned to sit there and just endure shocks, he said they didn't learn to be helpless. They failed to ever learn a sense of control. So like my, hey, I'm not on that list, kid. Her perception is this isn't her responsibility because everybody else, all the other adults are putting all this energy and trying to save it to solve the problem for her. And she's like, why do I have to kick? And they've got this covered, right? So the research that Mayer would do with rats, with dogs, with all sorts of animals, and put them in a situation where they would get shocked, wasn't life-threatening, but pretty stressful, and then give them some mechanism by which they could spin a wheel or what have you and stop the shock. The animals that had that experience of some sense of control during an adverse experience, wild activation of the prefrontal cortex, dampened down the stress response, the amygdala, deepened those connections that Bill had on the previous slide, deepen the connections, and this is at a neurological level what coping looks like. A rodent or a dog in the same situation got shocked without a sense of control, ended up being a basket case. And Mayer made the point that, at least for rodents, and this has been repeated with primates and other animals as well, one experience of having a sense of control during an adverse experience during adolescence seems to inoculate the brain against the effects of harmful effects of stress almost for life. And so when kids are struggling, we don't want to leave them just to, suffer, but we don't want to jump in and solve things for them because when we do, we deprive them of the opportunity to feel their sense of control, their sense of agency, their sense of ability and autonomy, and we leave them perpetually kind of a damsel in distress. And we miss this wildly important opportunity during adolescence when brains are being sculpted and kids can develop the coping brain that we really want them to have as they move forward into life. We love this cartoon. um, So some just basic things about motivation, and this is really important. A friend of mine was pointing out that she said we can think about ADHD as an interest-driven motivation system, not an importance-driven motivation. You kind of can't make people want what they don't want and care about what they don't care about. You can make them feel really bad, but it doesn't make them want it. And you can't make kids not want. You can lecture till the cows come home about how stupid this video game or that thing is, and it's not going to make a kid not want it. It's just going to make him feel really bad about wanting it. And that's probably not a winning play. And then, of course, when you try to change someone who's not asking for help, they just fight you. I mean, only every time. And it's not, and then we end up trying to exert power and unintentionally lose our influence. And long term, we want to have influence with our kids, not power over them, because eventually they're going to become adults and we want to have an adult relationship where we want them to grow into adults. So here's our North Star for motivation. And again, this is not for neurotypical people. This is for all human beings. What's called self-determination theory is the model for intrinsic motivation, for not just working hard with carrots and sticks and applied behavioral therapy. It is helping people want to do the work, want to work hard. And there are three psychological needs that have to be met. I have to feel competent. I have to feel related, connected to my mom, my dad, the teacher, the activity, and I need to feel a sense of autonomy. And what happens with kids who are struggling is we, loving, concerned adults, can jump in. Here, let me show you how to do this. Let me help you. It's well intended, but it's basically at that same moment saying, you're not competent. I have to do this for you, right? I'm telling you I'm going to do it. I'm not asking if you want my help. And I've now gone from being loving, supporting mom or dad to kind of, the homework, police. And unintentionally, while we may be making kids be more competent, they don't feel more competent. They don't feel autonomy and they don't feel relatedness. And you're back to my kid saying, I'm not on that list. And good news is there are ways that we can develop this, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. And I'm going to hand it over to Bill a little bit. Yeah,
Go back to leave that other slide
yeah,
up for just for a
yeah,
second.
yeah.
So I just tested a kid a couple of weeks ago. He's just almost 16. He's a 10th grader, and really smart kid, just a brilliant mathematical mind, and ADHD, a lot of anxiety, very close to being on the spectrum. I didn't quite pull the trigger on a diagnosis, but very close. And the sweetest kid, really nice family, and the parents very well intentioned. They're very concerned because the kid has very low academic engagement. He's just not. He flunked English last one semester last year in ninth grade. He just doesn't work very hard, and he and they have Life 360 to monitor him. They have cameras in the house. They're monitoring his school portal constantly and on him. But what about this assignment? And they come to me and say, why is he motivated? Why is he so anxious? And if you just look at this self-determination theory, they're undermining a sense of autonomy by saying, we know what's right for you. You got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do this. So he spends all his energy resisting
Mm.
that. It's just they fight a lot about it. So it undermines that relatedness. And he's just underachieving. He's getting poor grades. So it undermines his sense of competence. And I know that we can turn this around once they understand what we're talking about, this idea of how important it is for for him to have a sense of control over his own life. Next slide, please.
Hmm.
And when Ned, you've been emphasizing that this stuff just doesn't apply to neurotypical people. And one of the experts in autism I really like is this Peter Vermeulen, who is probably most famous for his theory of context blindness in autism. But he has this idea of including autistic people in society because as valuable citizens and recognizing they have the same needs as everybody else, these same needs for competence and relatedness and autonomy. And the needs may be satisfied in somewhat different ways in terms like particularly relatedness, but they have the same need. Next slide, please.
And
And
I would just add, I mean, my 24-year-old, 23-year-old son is ADHD and one of the dreamiest kids in the world, but oh boy, never had a homework assignment he couldn't misplace. And my daughter, who's autistic, and I didn't know that for many years of their lives, but applied these exact same principles, and thank goodness.
yeah. And it's so interesting because when we wrote The Self-Driven Child, there's very little research, almost none, on promoting autonomy in neurodivergent kids. There may be maybe four studies total, and they were promising, but there's just very little attention. There's probably over 100 studies on promoting autonomy in students in general, neurotypical students, but not neurodivergent. And I love this Peter Vermeulen, and he has a new book out, What Really Works with Kids with Autism. And he has these 9 principles, and the fourth is promoting autonomy. So it's starting to show up in autism. And I just want to mention here, I don't have a slide for it, but there's a woman by the name of Margaret Sibley in Florida who has a program for parents of ADHD kids. It's called the STAND program. It stands for Supporting Teens Autonomy Daily. And her clinical experience of working with families of kids who have ADHD was that by the time a kid's 16, 40% of the parents are kind of burnt out and just, you're on your own, buddy. And 40% are still trying to kind of manage the kid's life pretty intensely. And 20% are supporting autonomy. So she created this program, and if we could put it in the chat or something, that'd be great. But it's Margaret Sibley, and it's the STAND program. There's a book about it. That if you're interested, ADHD kid, teenage kid particularly, that there's this program for parents to learn how to just ways to promote autonomy.
And if you have the self-driven child, that's in the chapter about autism, ADHD, and learning disabilities. So the citation is in the footnotes of that chapter.
Thank you, Fred.
Sure.
Take it away, my friend.
So in the 7 principles for raising a self-driven child, the first chapter is about putting connection first. And there are so many reasons why this matters, starting with we can't help kids solve problems that we don't know about. And kids, especially when they're struggling, and we're back to that T of the threat to ego, they oftentimes want to hide their struggle because they don't want us to be disappointed in them. They don't want us to be controlling of them, to take away their phones. They don't want it to make us feel anxious or concerned. They tell us that everything is fine. And Bill had a client he was working with some while ago, who was first year of college, and he flunked all of his classes his first semester. Bill tested him ADHD, learning disabilities, anxiety, a bunch of stuff going on. Told his parents, he said he started second semester. I've really turned this around. I'm going to all my classes every day. Told Bill, I haven't been to class in 4 weeks. And when you have kids for whom school life is hard, they need your help. They do. Because if they didn't need your help, things wouldn't be going the way that they are. But if we put our energy into trying to correct the thing rather than connect with a kid, we're not very well positioned to help them with the things that they need help with. It's also the case that when things aren't going well, emotionally, kids are going to be kind of a mess. And when we put all of our energy in trying to fix the thing rather than connecting with a kid, we can unintentionally be conveying a message to the kid that I kind of only approve of you when things are going well, right? And to love someone and to support them unconditionally is, I'm with you. I love you no matter how big a mess your room is, your grades are, your life is. And as someone who has dealt with both myself and a child who was very seriously depressed, it's unbelievable. You cannot overstate the power of how important a close connection is, that a child can have that ideally with a parent or another caregiver. So big deep dive on that chapter, first chapter of our book, about why this is so important. And when we were writing this chapter, we had this book. We talked with a bunch of local teens at school, and we asked them who are they close. Bill asked them, who do you feel closest to? And sometimes my mom, she's great, my dad, but sometimes a coach, a teacher, my older sister, whatever, whatever. And he said, what is about them? And he said, that makes him feel close. And he said, well, they listen to us without judging, and they don't tell us what to do all the time. And the thing that's hard for us as parents, we all have something called a rating reflex. So if Bill or Charlene or Bev or anyone starts telling me a problem, my brain immediately goes into overdrive. Well, Bill, what about this? What about this? Or, oh my gosh, Charlene, it's no big deal. Everybody makes a mistake. Don't beat yourself up that way. And the problem is, unintentionally, that can feel a little invalidating. Well, Bill, if only you thought of one of these three things that just jumped to my mind, you wouldn't be in this pickle. Or Charlene, you're really thinking about this all wrong. You shouldn't be this upset about it. And so what we want to do, the way that we connect, is using empathy and validation. And all that it is, I see that you're upset. I see that you're having a really hard time about this. And I'd be upset too. One of the stories in our second book about communication, my daughter had been playing Minecraft with one of her friends, and she had spent a gazillion hours acquiring some treasure, whatever the heck it was. And then by some miscommunication with her friend, she got torched in like a volcano. I don't remember the details. And hours of work just poof, gone. And she was in a mood. And she's going on and on about this. And my son, well-intended, said, well, if you do this, then you can save it. And, da, da, da. And she looked at him like, I'm going to throw you down these stairs. She was so mad. And he was trying to offer good advice, but he skipped right past the fact that she was mad and tried to get to the solution. And my wife, to her everlasting credit, she just said, oh, gosh, that sucks, which is a pretty inelegant but wildly effective way to validate what she was feeling, because it did suck and she was mad. A tool that we love, I know that Ron McGann has joined Parent Venture. Lovely, lovely, lovely. I mean, expert on communication. And he talks about wigging. Simply is what I got is, so wait, Katie, what you're telling me is you spent 3 hours on this and your friend told you to go in such and such mode, but told you wrong, and then you burned up? God. When we repeat back as best we can, we're conveying to someone, I'm really trying hard to understand your perspective on this. If you think about this with kids where school is messy, particularly the ADHD, raised one of these, was one of these, and they come to, oh my God, it's so unfair. I did so terribly on that test and I study like crazy. And Mr. Johnson, he's the worst teacher. And you're thinking, study, buddy? I mean, you were like 6 hours watching football football. We love the 49ers, but still. And then you're on your phone the whole time. And when exactly? Don't go there. Don't do it. Emotionally take their side if you want to have any chance of having connection and therefore influence. And all that that means is you can validate and use Wiggin and say something like, gosh, so what you're telling me is that Mr. Johnson put all these things on the test that he told you wouldn't be there. Gosh, I'd be mad about that too. I'd be upset if listen to the words, I'd be upset too if I felt like I had studied really hard for that test and it hadn't gone well. Note, I don't have to agree with the facts, but I can validate the feelings that they have. And when we do that, we're in such a better position to actually navigate in ways and help in ways they want. And a kid who feels like you're validating their perspective is much more likely to be honest and say, well, I mean, I guess I probably should have turned off not watched that last game and really got to my homework a little bit closer. And then you can say things like, well, next time, would you like me to remind you? You're much more well positioned than just jumping to the solutions.
Beautiful. And in 1986 or so, I tested this kid whose mother was a humorist. And she said, we shouldn't call it raising children. We should call it lowering parents because it's hard. And I think that the parenting is harder now than it was then. But around that same time, it occurred to me that I saw so many kids particularly with ADHD, kids whose parents and teachers would spend 80 or 90 units of energy trying to get the kids to perform, and the kid would spend 10 or 20 units. What I noticed, what I learned over time, is that ratio didn't change until the energy changed, until the kid got a sense that this is my life. And so the metaphor that I came up with was thinking about as your kids get older, think about yourself more as your consultant to your kid, rather than as their manager or the boss or someone who always knows best or the homework police. And Ned and I kind of think that there's three major implications of this idea of parent as consultant. And the first is we want to offer our help and advice and as much structure and support as kids need, but not try to force it. We want to be really clear about who's responsible for what. And we don't want to work harder than kids do, because that unit, you got adults spending 80 units of energy and 20 units, kids spending 20. That if adults get more anxious and go up to 90, the kid will spend 10. It just doesn't change until we change the energy and we don't work harder. And I was at an IEP meeting a few years ago, and on a kid who had worked with the speech pathologist from first grade through sixth grade. He's in fifth grade. He was in fifth grade when I saw him. And she says he fights me every single session. I try to get him to do this, so he just fights me. And I said, does it feel like you work harder than he does? She said, every day. And I know she's trying to do her job, but it's so counterproductive. In our new book, there's a Post-it note that says it's more important that kids get an accurate sense of who's responsible for what than it is that they always do well. And I think with neurodivergent kids, we spend so much focus on trying to get them to do and make progress that we forget this autonomy piece. And the title of the second chapter in The Self-Driven Child is "I Love You Too Much to Fight with You About Your Homework." And as Charlene and Bev have probably heard us say before, when the book came out, one of my clients called me, or actually emailed me and said, I just told my seventh grade son, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And first he smiled, and then he hugged me and he said, there's something wrong with you, Mom. It made him a little nervous that she said that. And we want to support kids in making their own decisions. In my experience, because I used to do a lot of therapy with kids, my experience is if you encourage kids to make informed decisions, talk to your mom, talk to your teacher, talk to your uncle. He knows a lot about this. So you give them the information they need. They can make good decisions for themselves, and they're motivated to make good decisions for themselves because kids want their lives to work. And the last thing is Ned was implying when we're talking about that learned helplessness is that we want to encourage kids to solve their own problems. We want them to develop a brain that has that confidence that I can handle hard situations because I have. And so when we try to protect them from encountering stressful things or leaping in to solve it for them, we deprive them of engaging in that brain state that Ned talked about, where the prefrontal cortex activates to go into coping mode, dampens down the stress response, and you got a problem and you're coping with it. It's not that stressful. But the thing that's really stressful is you got a problem and you don't know what to do. Other people don't want what to do. There's a timeline. Oh my God, I can't figure this out. That's the most stressful. That low sense of control is the most stressful thing you can experience. And want kids to solve their own problems as much as they can, because that's the only way they can develop that kind of confidence in their ability to solve problems. Next slide, please. And just one of I think the most useful, the feedback we get is this idea in our second book. The most useful appearance, and educators too, is this idea of a language of a parent consultant. And the two major implications, number one, we want to get buy-in. So many parents say, God, I've told them a million times, or I keep trying to get him to see. And I just say, save your breath. There's more skillful ways to influence kids. And so you can see what the kinds of things that Ned and I say in our work with kids and teenagers. So, I got an idea about it. Can I run it by you? Or, I'd like you to consider. It just actually, we just recently read that there's a study of adolescents who were waiting to get organ transplants. And they had to do certain things to be ready for the transplant. And the adolescents were twice as likely to be compliant with what they're supposed to do if the doctor said, I'd like you to consider doing this and this, than if they said, you need to do this or this. Because people don't like to feel forced. So what I say a lot is, for whatever it's worth, then I'll run an idea by a kid. I want to make it tentative because I don't want them to fight me on it. And certainly the one that we get a lot of feedback from is simply, the kid has a problem. Is there a way that I could help? There's no force, that then you become an ally, and it changes the energy in a way that oftentimes is really good for your relationship and really good for solving problems. And the language of no force, because you really can't make a kid do something, acknowledging that I couldn't make you do that is really an empowering thing. And I was inspired by Ross Greene, who got famous from a book called The Explosive Child maybe 20 years ago, who works with very difficult, angry, resistant, hot, explosive kids. And one of the things he came to do was say, I'm not going to try to force you. I'm not going to try to use the force of my will to make you do things. And I just had a sense of this with my own kids. And I told my own kids that I couldn't make you do that. All you have to do is fall on the floor. I couldn't make you do it. So, and taking force off the table it feels a little scary at first, where you just realize I can't overpower this kid. But then then you become more skillful, and it's really very, very empowering to do that. And I'll mention that my son has ADHD, and I like Ned did. I walked this walk as well. I never monitored homework. I never. Occasionally, I'd say, that looks a little. You probably do a little better job on that. You want my suggestion? And if you said yes, I'd offer a suggestion. He said no. I said okay. This is your homework. And when he's in high school, if he told me, I never knew about his assignments, or if he told me he had a test, and I in the evening I went by and I knew he wasn't studying, I'd say, "Do you want me to bug you about that a little bit?" And he'd say, "Yeah, you probably should. How many times do you want me to remind you?" And I'd get his buy-in and make sure I wasn't trying to force him, and it just works. I know recently, Ned and I were talking about one of our clients whose mother, with a mother of 4 kids. I've tested all 4 kids. Ned did test prep with all 4 kids. And the mother loves me, loves Ned, really respects us, but was very micromanaging of her kids. And I tested her younger son when he was 15, and he was just a mess. ADHD, anxiety disorder, OCD, learning disabilities, a lot of trouble in school. Teachers found him very frustrating, trouble connecting with kids. And eventually, she just said, I'm just going to try this Ned's and Bill's approach. So she read The Self-Driven Child, and she started focusing on a consultant. She stopped checking his grades all the time, asking about his homework constantly. And she sent me some feedback that teachers had given him. It sounded like on a report card. It was a senior year, and said he's an incredible young man. He's an inspiration to other kids. He's completely responsible. He trusts his own decisions. This stuff, it works because this is what the brain needs. Ned, do you want to take over?
Yeah, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of being a non-anxious presence, but a bit to sort of tie this into there's a comment in the chat I took note of. I think it probably speaks for a lot of parents where, this is all well and good, but my kid's making bad decisions, the grades aren't good, we're worried about college, and yada yada yada. And I'll say this, we've made this point hundreds of times, and I can say this even as a guy who's a test prep geek who helps kids get into college, that unreservedly, unequivocally, the most important outcome of high school and adolescence is not the college that you go to or even going to college, but rather the brain that you develop and carry into adulthood. And it's hard because if you've got a kid who's neurodivergent, who's autistic, who's ADHD, who's dysregulated, you worry enormously because you're thinking, my kid's a C student, is he going to have a C life? In our experience, that's not how it works out because kids want their lives to work out. And so it may be a disaster now, but one of the ways that we can help kids, frankly, get into gear and work a little bit harder is when we're not worried sick and tell them you've ruined your entire life, right? Bill tells a story about working with a kid who was just really a mess. And he said, has anyone told you, that you could go to local community college and if you get 30 credits, then you can transfer to pretty much any college in the country and no one will ever ask about your high school grades. And when he felt like he wasn't doomed, it was so helpful. And so it's easier to help kids who seem to be stuck or not in gear or falling off the path kind of do the work to getting themselves back on the path if we're not worried sick about them as well and know that America, unlike a lot of other countries, has a lot of paths for, plan B and getting back on it. And so it's just really important, and particularly for those of you who have kids who are ADHD. I remember the very first lecture I ever saw Bill give. He said, the most important thing I have ever learned about brains is this: how slow to develop is the prefrontal cortex. And so certainly parents say, well, how can we trust him with a decision? His prefrontal cortex isn't developed. It's completely backwards. Brains develop in the ways that they're used. So if we want kids to become good decision makers, we have to let them make lots of decisions, and even including making bad ones, and learn from those natural consequences. Because that process of that didn't work, how else can I do this? And mom and dad emotionally, dude, that sucked. That wasn't what you planned for. I'm so sorry. How can I help? That being said, it's hard to do that as a parent because if your kid is struggling, you feel like you're judged by your spouse, your in-laws, the neighbors, the school. Everybody's looking at you like, yeah, you're the you're the guy with a screwed up kid. My daughter was full school refusal for 3 months of 8th grade. Didn't go to school at all. I'm a guy who hopes people get into college. What's going through my head? And I had to keep reminding myself, she's a super smart kid. It's really hard for her right now. She's doing the best that she can. It's a mess. But over time, she wants this to work out in the same way that my wife and I want this to work out for her. And she's killing it now. She's killing it now. But 7 years ago when she was in 8th grade, a disaster. And so one of the things that can help you enormously and your kid enormously is to move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence, in part because if we've ideally made the case that what your kids need is to be unconditionally loved, and to give them all the reign that they can have to have as much autonomy as possible, that by definition means that you as a parent are not as controlling of them. And it's easier for you or me as a parent to be less controlling if we're less anxious ourselves. Ideally, a non-anxious present, just this: you're not overly anxious. You're like, well, okay. And you take the long view on things. You're not overly emotionally reactive. If your kid is upset about school life, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, you're probably not going to help them as if you are as emotionally reactive as they are. Have you ever tried to soothe an infant when you were stressed out? Doesn't work very well. And again, all these things, you can read this stuff as well as I can read it to you. It's important to note as well that all emotions are really contagious. And so if you're stressed out, you're going to stress out your kid. But to give us all some grace, if your kid is stressed out and you're anywhere close to emotionally attuned with them, they're going to stress you out as well. And so note that if your kid comes out as intense and you get really intense as well, try to think about what are the processes by which you can lower your own stress to sort of, instead of adding fuel to the fire, be a bit of a stress sponge, right? My kid, for those of you who've seen other talks, had a kid who had brain tumor after his first year of college. He's doing great. But one of the things that just forever, ever amazed me was every single person that we saw at Children's National, from the orderlies to the nurses to the doctors to the, I mean, all of them, their energy. This is how we roll, And for me, this is like the worst week of my life, and for them, it was just Tuesday. And part of it is either by training or by dint of personality, they kind of ooze that non-anxious presence because calm is contagious. And when they were calm, it helped me be more calm. It helped my kid be more calm. It helped all of us think about these things better. Um, Last thing, you read all these things. I won't, we've got some other things we want to talk to, and we want to talk about getting your questions as well.
Yeah, so we should probably talk for a couple more minutes, Ned, and then
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
But I mean, this point that you're making about that taking a long view, because all our anxiety about our kids, no matter how they're wired, is it's about the future. Because I've seen at least 1,000. I mean, I've seen several thousand kids in my career, but I've seen at least 1,000 kids who are just a complete disaster at some point who turned out incredible. And I just recently I communicated with a guy who was in a therapeutic boarding school all 4 years of high school, and
Wow.
yeah, and he just opened his practice a couple of years ago as a neuropsychologist in Bellevue, Washington. Just last night, my wife and I had a Zoom dinner with a young man in Florida who is the son of one of my friends who died during the pandemic. And this guy, when I before the pandemic, when I knew this guy, he was like at age 28. He's really smart, but he had a high school education. He was working at the Post, doing technical work at the Post because he's got a brilliant technical mind. But he's a drug addict. He's living with a 14-year-old girl who's completely explosive, unpredictable, irresponsible. And he just finished his master's degree in computer science. And now he's just a completely different human being with a more mature brain. And taking this long view is so important. And the other thing is simply, I think the second most important thing is probably that if we're going to be a non-anxious presence, which and kids just want their parents. If you ask kids, what do you want most from your parents? It's not, I want to spend more time with them. It's, I want them to be happier and less stressed. And so if you want that commit to your own stress management. And we're huge fans of meditation. Certainly, for many people, exercise. They feel most calm when they've exhausted themselves, and vigorous exercise is really good. But we're fans of mindfulness practice. I've done transcendental meditation for 52 years. Ned probably at least 15 or 20 now. Yeah, just having a way to experience that the deepest levels of our own mind, the quiet, peaceful, happy levels of our own mind. Really important, really helpful for moving that direction of being a non-anxious presence in our family. Also really helpful for young people as well. We can talk about that. Ned, anything else you want to say? Well, I'll have to mention that I know this family with the mom and her 17-year-old autistic son learned transcendental meditation together. And the mom thought it was just kind of remarkable how effective it was for both of them. So she had a friend who's a newspaper reporter do a story on it. And the reporter asked the kid, what do you notice from the meditation? He said, it calms the mind and it calms the mom. Dad, any final words before we take questions?
Raising kids is never easy. And raising kids who are neurodivergent is decidedly more challenging. Can be a lot more fun, but can be a lot more challenging. And if you're a parent who's got a kid who's struggling right now, you have our deepest empathy. We need a whole nother hour, Charlene and Bev, for me to share all the kind of adventures and misadventures with my kids. But to echo Bill's point, one of the things, it's not intuitive, but one of the things that is so helpful for us, for our children rather, is for us to, as much as we can, to kind of serve as emotional ballast, where we don't get too excited, we don't get too upset. We kind of stay a little bit more, and and it's not that we don't empathize and commiserate with kids or celebrate their successes, but it's incredibly helpful for parents, for kids to know that mom and dad are pretty solid, especially when things don't go well. And so I wish that Bill and I and all Charlene and Bev, we all wish that for you, because if you've got a kid where things aren't going well, it's harder. I mean, it's really easy to look like a great parent when everything's going perfectly with your kids. But for a lot of you who are probably here right now, things aren't probably perfect. You'll probably be doing something else right now. But know that again, one things you can really help your kid is to be a non-anxious presence. And one quick thing on that is just to enjoy your kids just the way they are. It often feels like you're a bad parent unless you're putting all of your energy into fixing the part of their life that's not going well. And in my experience, that's not the way things tend to work out. When we put our energy into loving our kids, I'll go over to Byron Katie, loving our kids just the way that they are, it makes it much more likely that all those kind of wobbly executive functions of theirs come back online or become a little bit stronger. And they're much more apt to be able to find within themselves, with your support, solutions to some of the problems that have been currently such a thorn in your side. Um, and as kids who have gone through a lot, I can say from my experience and Bill's thousands of kids, um, things tend to work out well enough because your children, like you, want things for them to work out well enough.
Thank you, Bill and Ned, for really a beautiful and reassuring discussion about what matters most in raising our kids, especially neurodivergent ones. My daughter has a newborn baby who came into this world with heart failure 7 weeks ago. Her husband is on the spectrum. Turns out he's an amazing parent. His ability to kind of keep the emotions low, really focus. He is an amazing dad. So the world works in interesting and amazing ways, right?
Mm,
So listen, we have a lot of questions and not a lot of time, but let's see what we can do, okay?
sure. Yeah.
We would love your thoughts on these issues. Here's a good question. Writer asks, the language around learning disabilities and ADHD often centers on deficits, particularly in discussions about autonomy. How can parents and caregivers shift towards a strength-based framework, both in their wording and how they support their kids?
In my work, I certainly I'm trying to often figure out what's the problem here, but I spend probably more time trying to testing broadly to understand what are kids good at, and because the two things that I want young people to know, as they're, particularly by the time that they're kind of middle adolescents, is what you can do better than most people, and to be paying attention to what you really love to do, because that I see kids who have a lot of difficulties, but they aren't going to, if they try to make a living do the stuff they suck at, it's not going to go well. They're going to have to. You want kids to know. I want you to pay attention. What I care about mainly is the stuff that you can do really well, because that's the stuff you're going to use. That's going to be your gift to this world. And so I think that no matter what the situation, we want to focus on help kids understand what they can do well, ideally what they can do better than most people, or as well as most
Mm.
people, because that's what you're going to use in this world. And the other stuff will work at that. We'll try to make it easier for you. But we want to keep a focus on who you are. And a large part of who you are is what you have to offer this world. What you have to offer this world is your strengths.
I love it. Someone when he was in middle school would do things like getting 52s on history tests out of 100, in case you're curious, because he would study, the wrong chapter. Amazing, amazing to watch. He's now doing a graduate program at one of the best, as a composer, one of the best programs in the country. And we'll get texts from him like, I just finished up this such and such at like 6:30 in the morning. I'm like, you're just getting up to finish this? He's like, no. He'd been composing for 14 hours straight. And so one of the challenges with ADHD is it can be really difficult to pay attention to stuff you just don't care about. Like, I don't know, what chapter in history. But the superpower becomes that ability to be just completely immersed, completely in a flow state, and write this. I mean, in his case, writing music, or some people it's writing code, and just in ways that the neurotypical people would really struggle to focus with that degree of attention. And so two sides of the same coin. And so I love that question, talking about, and Bill said, what do you like in what that type of ikigai, right? What are you better at than most people? What do you like doing, and what does the world need? And when you can figure out that sweet spot, that's where people tend to have, really not just successful but fulfilling work and lives.
All right. So as parents, we can help be that competence-based view for our children, right?
Hmm.
Completely.
Okay. Okay. This is a really honest question. I appreciate it. Writer asks, regarding wigging and validating our kids' feelings, is there ever a place for tough love? If so, when is it? How about validating 80-20, 50-50? What do you say?
Well, I think that validating a kid's feeling that doesn't mean that I endorse this or I see it the same way or I'm going to go along with whatever you want. It just means that you're getting the message that it's understandable the way you feel, and it's still I'm still setting a limit here, whatever, it's just a matter of a kind of emotionally healthy way to interact, and it doesn't it's not really so much related to kids need limits. Otherwise, they feel insecure. We want to set, ideally, we work out limits with kids that they understand and kind of agree, can see the logic of. But it doesn't mean that we just that we don't are that we aren't firm. I mean, historically, what kids need is that they need warmth and they need firmness, so that they aren't mutually exclusive at all.
And there was an important word you used in there, Bill, and it's with. That often parents are setting limits that are top down, but if they did it with their kids, it would work better.
Oh God, it's so much different if we kind of just agree on family rules and you have a contract regarding technology. What should we do? If it's time to get off and you don't. Well, how should we handle that? That kind of conversation can really change the dynamic in a family in a way um, that just setting arbitrarily setting limits or no phone for you for a week just doesn't. It's much more effective.
I know you guys have had David Yeager on and his wonderful
Not
book,
yet,
10,
but we'd like to.
oh, 10 to, oh, we'll work on it. 10 to 12. So people don't know, we need to get him. He obviously needs to be with you guys. But his wonderful book called 10 to 25, and he makes the point that he said, we don't treat infancy like a flawed time of life. We shouldn't treat adolescence like a flawed time of life. He said, it's just that in the same way that infants need sleep and food, adult teenagers need respect and standing, right? And so when we treat children, when we treat teens disrespectfully, and then we're surprised that they don't go along with us very well. I mean, that's just they're that's what they need, and we can disagree respectfully. We really can.
I'm
It's
going to
hard.
finish with this one last question because I believe this is, oh, so many parents feel this. And then I'm going to give you each a few seconds to wrap up, okay?
Sure.
Question is, how do we deal with the pressure from schools and teachers on the kids and on us parents? When our kids aren't doing their work and have no motivation, the pressure from the school can be intense and it's hard not to react. And then they place that pressure back on the kids.
Can I jump in with my favorite story? So my daughter, it was in eighth grade at the time, and I know it's more fraught when it's in high school, but still, she was in eighth grade, and she had a teacher. It was, I mean, she was overwhelmed, and she had this test, and I'm a tutor, so I'm thinking, oh, I'll help you study for this, and I'm looking at this and like, oh no 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 no, like the 11 most significant Greek sculptors, not Greek artists, but just I'm like, this is like, forget it, not. But I wanted her to be in school because staying at home day after day by herself is not good developmentally, right? I wanted to be with her friends. I wanted her to go to science class because she loved her science teacher, blah, blah, blah. And so I was not going to act like this test mattered or this learning mattered because, I mean, I don't know any Greek sculptors. My life is fine. But school matters and friends matter, right? And so I said, would you be willing? So what I'm going to say is we want to walk the walk. We want to walk, not just words, right? So I said, well, would you be willing to go and take that test? She said, but I'm going to fail. I said, are you sure? She said, yes, I am. I said, not a 70, not a 60. I'm going to fail it. I said, listen, kiddo, if you will go to school because that's what I think is important, and you take that test because I don't want you to hide away from when things don't go well. But if you'll take that test and you'll fail it good and hard, I will immediately check you out of school. We will walk hand in hand down to Silver, your favorite diner. We will have lunch at 11:23 on a Tuesday, followed by hot fudge sundaes at 11:43, because I could give a fig about anything that's on that stupid test. All I want for you is to engage in school. And that's what we did. I really regret not taking a picture. It would have been a great social media entry. And so, if we think that half the stuff that kids have to do in school, frankly, and no offense to teachers, but even they know half the stuff they ask kids to do, they kind of do it to get someone else off their back. If they think it's BS, call it out. You don't say, well, Bill, you want to tell the story about Jorah? That
Oh,
NPR one? Oh, God, I love this
oh,
story.
yeah, yeah. So when our first book came out, I was interviewed by NPR. They also interviewed my daughter, and because there's a story in The Subdriven Child where my daughter was a good student, and a lot of her high achieving friends were getting paid to get A's. And
Mhm.
I offered her $100 for a C so she could see it's just not that big a deal. And she never took it up. And she was asked about that when she interviewed in NPR. And then she said, I also remember when like I was in first and second grade, and the teachers said you need to read 20 minutes a night. And she already liked to read. So I wrote back and said, respectfully, I'm not going to make her do this because she already likes to read. I'm not going to ruin reading for her. And one of the things that there's a book that came out like in 1988 called How to Deal with Your Acting Up Teenager. A lot of these same kind of ideas about not trying to force and treating kids respectfully. So in school, in the high school, they call and say your kid's way behind on teacher calls your kid's way behind. Say I'll put him on the phone. You know that you and I've encouraged many of my clients to just say that this is her schoolwork. And respectfully, I love her too much to take responsibility for something that's hers. She knows I'm available to help her in any way. We've offered to get her tutoring. But I'm not going to make this the major focus of my relationship with my daughter. And I'm also not going to weaken her by taking responsibility for something that's hers. I've encouraged dozens and dozens and dozens of my clients to take that attitude, and because it's just what kids need.
That's a great story. When my daughter was in the sixth grade, she came downstairs and looked at me and said, "Don't you ever talk to me about my homework again."
Well,
And I did
Strong-willed
it.
child. We like this.
She
well,
did just fine. Anyway, listen,
yeah.
we have come to the end of our wonderful hour with you two, and everybody who knows us knows that you are really two of our very, very favorites. So, Bill and Ned, a minute each to kind of give us some final words, if you would. Either of you may start.
Yeah.
So one of the most powerful ideas that I've encountered in my life, I think was maybe I initially started to think about it when I got a call. Well, I got a call from a woman about 10 years ago, and she said, "You probably don't remember me, but we went to graduate school together, and I saw you were mentioned in a New York Magazine article, and I just wondered, are you the same William Stixrud that went to the University of Minnesota?" So I said, not only she called me probably 10 years, so let's say 2015. This was in 1978 to 82 that we were in school together. So it's a long time ago. And I said, not only did I remember you, I just told somebody about you yesterday. And what I remembered was that she had a son who was apparently a child genius, and he had a brain tumor when he was 12, and it took away some of the genius. When I knew him, he was 24 years old. He's a wonderful kid. He was working. He had got a college degree. And the mom said one day I was talking to my priest and I started crying. I said, he could have been a Nobel Prize winner. And she said, my priest said, Pat, I've never seen God's plan for your son. I assume this is it. And I personally love the idea that Ned showed the cover of Byron Katie's book, Loving What Is. I personally love the idea that for all we know, the world is exactly the way it's supposed to be. Because if you have the idea, I know the way the world is supposed to be, and this ain't it. Well, it's an interesting theory, but there's no evidence for it. And I think so my angle with the kids I work with, even the kids who are really struggling, is I work to see it. This is part of their path. This isn't wrong. I'm going to help them every way I can, but I'm okay with it. I can accept where they are right now because I'm assumed that this is part of their path. I personally find, and many people find that what we call that radical acceptance of reality is really, really powerful. And with my own child rearing, I think in my own professional work, it just helps me so much to ground me in the idea that this is their path. For all I know, that this is the right thing for them.
Thank you, Bill. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Ned,
So I love Joseph Campbell and the power of myth. And I love the idea of the hero's journey, right? And we
Mm.
want all of our children to feel like heroes or heroines in their own lives. But an integral part of the hero's journey is they have to have setbacks and they have to get singed by the dragon and they have to struggle and be just and they have to. That's part of how they become who they are. And woe to the would-be hero or heroine whose mommy or daddy jumps in and takes on the dragon in the cave for them because they deprive them of that opportunity. And there's a story at the very end of The Self-Driven Child. This is from a wonderful movie from years ago called Miss Peregrine's School for Gifted Children. Peculiar Children, excuse me, Peculiar Children. Way more fun that way. And if you've seen this movie, there are these invisible monsters that they come and they kill all the people. And there are all these children who have all these different superpowers, as it were. But the protagonist, the only power that he has, he doesn't have super speed or super strength or anything, but he can see the monsters. So this is an odd thing. He can see this, but he's powerless to do anything about it. And at the very end of the movie, he's just in tears and he's apologizing to his friends. And I couldn't keep you safe. I couldn't keep you safe. And she turns to him and she said, you did something so much more powerful. You allowed us to feel brave. Because he was able to point the thing out, and then the other young children were able to go on and vanquish their own demons, right? Dragons or whatever they were. And we think about, it's a lovely model for us as parents that we have the foresight. We can see the things that are coming down the line, but we can't and we shouldn't fight their battles for them, lest we deprive them of the opportunity to feel and become brave.
Beautiful.
Oh, I think that is the perfect place to end. Dr. Stixrud and Mr. Johnson, a beautiful discussion tonight. Thank you, everybody. I know we're a little bit late, but I just had to give Bill and Ned one more chance. So thank you, everybody, for joining us and for all your wonderful questions. Wish we could have answered them all. We promise we'll come back and do this again soon. Special thanks to you, Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson, for tonight. Take care, everybody. Hope to see you again soon. The video will be available soon. Bye-bye, everybody.